You're entering Corsi Nation.
We have a special interview today with Mike McCormick, and we've interviewed Mike before. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Corsi. Good to see you again.
And Chris, if you'll show Mike's book for a minute, Mike has written a book which is The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. Now, that came out before the election, has done very well. It is one that has been followed very closely and does lay out the case for the Biden family corruption. We'll get into that in a minute. We're going to discuss a new book today that Mike has got now in press. Mike, what's the name of that book?
The name is An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How the Obama Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic.
Okay, I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. And it follows on the heel of Trump's victory over Kamala Harris in the presidential election. Chris, we'll show very quickly God's Five Stones. I want to comment for a minute that we are continuing this work. The algorithms are continuing to be found, and we are going to, that's God's Five Stones, G-O-D, no apostrophe S, and 5 is spelled out, F-I-V-E, and stones is plural, S-T-O-N-E-S, gods5stones.com. We found the algorithm in Georgia. We found it in Arizona. We found it in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, as well as about a dozen other states which we're looking at and have reported on this website. We're going to continue to get donations, request donations, because we want to continue to get these algorithms out of the state Board of Education databases. We want to end this fraud now. And I think it could be an intelligence agency level fraud, because it's that complex. Intelligence agencies may have decided to start running our elections, and those QRs will get you to be able to fund. You can donate through the website. You can take your donation directly through the website, and those red buttons will direct you also to be able to fill it in indirect and to fill out the form, access either through the QRs or through those red buttons there to say donate here. We'll be continuing to follow this, and this is, I think, going to become a major initiative, including going into 2025, to try to get our elections to be more secure. Okay, now you can also reach us on X at Corsi Jerome 1 and on Substack Jerome Corsi PhD.substack.com. Okay, Mike, let's get into this. First of all, the Catholic Church. We've been doing quite a bit of work with Archbishop Vigano, and he wrote a letter to Catholics in America, which said basically that it was going to be a sin to vote for Kamala Harris. That Kamala Harris was lined with the forces that are to the deep church,
right?
With Bergoglio, his Pope Francis, wanting to take the Catholic Church in an LGBT direction, with all of these synods, bishops with meetings with bishops. Right. That are going to say, let's talk with these marginalized minorities. Well, that means give the LGBT a place in the Catholic Church. And of course, we're opposed to that. It's on our website, and there's the message from Archbishop Vigano to Catholics in America. And I think it really did influence the Catholic vote. Might have swung as much as 10% of the Catholic vote to Trump that might not otherwise have voted for Trump. So it was a very influential message. Now, Mike, why don't you start giving us some of the background here of the Catholic Church involvement with the deep church and how the deep state interacted with the deep church, and what was the collusion between the Biden family corruption and the Catholic Church. So why don't you just plunge in?
Okay, so that would be the first part of the book is the defilement of the Catholic Church, and it comes through Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. He was the central figure in this whole operation. McCarrick started off with a profile that looks like in the 60s, he went to Catholic University, came out of seminary, went to Catholic University, studied as an undergraduate, got a doctorate in sociology, and came out of there and became a fundraiser. But he was also very interested in having sex with men. And at the time, that was probably something that the intelligence agencies were looking for, that aspect of using shame somebody's shameful sexual activities to blackmail them into activities. So he winds up going through his priesthood, becoming quite a successful fundraiser, getting raised up to be a bishop. And then allegations start appearing about his use as a bishop, putting himself in a position to force young seminarians to share the bed with him in a beach house in New Jersey. There's a lot of accusations against him. They all just sort of get funneled up through the Catholic hierarchy, and then they stop at regional bishops. So he keeps moving up the ladder until the State Department gets a hold of him in the 90s, and they start using him as a global ambassador for religious freedom. They send him to sensitive areas like China, like Iran. And this is a guy who came out of the seminary, went to Catholic University, and all of a sudden he's tied right in the heart of DC diplomacy. And he is the DC voice for the Vatican, into and out of the Vatican. By 2000, by 2000, the year 2000, he gets named as the Archbishop of Washington. And then in 2001, he gets named as the Cardinal by Pope John Paul. So he's Cardinal McCarrick. He's renowned in Washington. In 2001, the Bush administration names him as the emissary between the Vatican and their trusted emissary between the Vatican and China. So he's being put into the role of representing globalist interests for the Vatican. And he's got this background where he's keeping it secret. In the early 2000s, there's the allegations about this terrible predatory sexual activities by the clergy, the Catholic clergy, come out. And McCarrick is in charge of he's on the board that's overseeing it. So this is a wolf in sheep's clothing trying to keep, keep the message. He's the bad guy who's the criminal who's, sort of in the police force policing for the innocents, and people don't understand it. So then he becomes a favorite of the Obama administration through a guy named Dennis McDonough. Dennis McDonough is a Catholic. He had two brothers in the priesthood. Both took holy orders. One is still in the priesthood. One resigned. McDonough in 2008, before Obama had even come into the White House, had reached out to other operatives and said, we want to get the president-elect in cahoots with the Pope Benedict. And so they started this relationship, but it was a very focused relationship to try to drive McCarrick into a position where he and McDonough are meeting regularly to do what Obama wants. So McDonough moves from being an assistant in the National Security Council. He was the assistant to the National Security Advisor. He moves up to be the White House Chief of Staff. Throughout this time, there are meetings upon meetings upon meetings in the White House between McDonough, specifically Dennis McDonough, and McCarrick. McCarrick would go in and meet with him. And then he would go out and, while he was doing these international trips, go to China, go to Iraq. So he was all over the place and doing this and covering for the predatory priest scandal that was sort of bubbling around.
Okay, now let's get a couple of things in terms of more background.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this, you are a stenographer in the White House, and why don't you explain that background and what it gave you access to being able to observe?
Well, I was a stenographer in the background. I started there in 2002, so I heard about McCarrick all the time. He was a favorite of the, and my job was as a press office stenographer of the White House press office. Whenever the president or the vice president had a meeting or an interview or a prayer breakfast or a St. Patrick's Day event, we did a transcript of it. Well, they always acknowledged Cardinal McCarrick. So Cardinal McCarrick was a central figure to DC politicians. He was well liked by the Bush administration. He was well liked by both sides, but he was very particular to the Democrats. Biden was a big fan of his. Senator Patrick Leahy was a big fan of his. Nancy Pelosi's a Catholic. She was with him a lot. But McCarrick was also very popular with the on the St. Patrick's Day. John Boehner had McCarrick speak at St. Patrick's Day events in Capitol Hill all the time. So he was a central figure, and the media knew this too. So he was well known by the media, well known by the politicians. And when Obama came in, they just moved McCarrick. I think his ideology as a gay priest, hidden, aligned with the sort of liberal force that Obama was talking about, trying to liberalize, attitudes towards gay people at that time in America.
Well,
So
give us a little bit more background on McDonough. Who is McDonough?
So McDonough came out of Minnesota, one of 11 kids of an Irish couple. They immigrated from Ireland. They had a large family. 2 went to the priesthood. He studied at Georgetown, and then he started working for Democrats in Capitol Hill, and eventually wound up working with Senator Obama, and then worked on his campaign. Did a great job in the campaign. The campaign reached out to Catholics, and McDonough was the guy who did that. And so once he got into the White House, he was their contact with McCarrick to get through into the Vatican. So there's some very suspicious meetings between McDonough, McCarrick, and Bergoglio in 2011, 2012, in the lead up to the resignation of Pope Benedict. And so it's very clear, and I write about this in the book, it's very clear that they are directing McCarrick to go down to Argentina and talk to Bergoglio. Now, there's a big report that was put out on McCarrick after he was discovered to be this pedophile. That was in 2018. He resigned from the priesthood, from the laity, he was delaicized, and then he resigned from his cardinal duties. By 2019, he was completely done with the church. He hasn't been excommunicated. He's now living sort of anonymously and avoiding the press. And he's living sort of under the church's roof, but with no official connection.
He was never excommunicated by the Pope, right?
He's never been excommunicated, and he's never confessed to the amount of evidence that's against him.
Okay, now there's no allegations about McDonough being gay, is there? I mean, that's not been an issue.
No, he's got a family and kids, but what he did was he was the guy who was putting they basically, in my opinion, I think McCarrick was a deep state operative. I think he was an intelligence community operative. And it was when Obama came in that he was sort of energized. He was tabbed to do his duty. And his duty was to go into the after all these years. And as a fundraiser, what he would do is he would raise funds and then distribute them to cardinals and bishops. Well, these are the guys that picked the Pope. So in 2013, when it was time to pick the Pope, McCarrick was ready to go, as instructed by Obama's deep state, into the process that picks the Pope. He had met with Bergoglio. He had met with Bergoglio officially in 2011 in Argentina, and he went back to Argentina twice in the lead up to this time period. He went to Argentina in October of 2012 and then December of 2012. And the Vatican report on McCarrick doesn't stipulate whether or not he met with Bergoglio there. No one's ever asked him that. The Vatican sort of said, yeah, he went there. They didn't follow up with the information. Did he talk to Bergoglio there? So the next step becomes this resignation by Pope Benedict in Rome. McCarrick is there. He starts talking up Bergoglio officially in media, pretty significant media. And then he talks behind the scenes to a lot of cardinals. And next thing you know, there's an election, and Bergoglio's the elected one. And then McCarrick comes back almost just a month after Bergoglio gets elected. McCarrick comes back and has more meetings with McDonough. And shortly thereafter, he starts traveling to China on behalf of both the Vatican and the White House. Bergoglio, at this point in time, after being elected Pope, sends a secret letter to Xi Jinping in China on allying, sort of connecting the Catholic Church with the Chinese government in a new way. And Xi Jinping sends back a letter. This is 2013.
Just to kind of in the Assange releases of documents from the Podesta files, which occurred in 2016. Those were the files that were supposedly stolen by the Russians from the Democratic National Committee files, email files. I don't believe they were stolen by the Russians. I think it was an inside job within the DNC, and I've always been suspicious of Seth Rich. Now, there are at least one of those emails. It says that the selection and the insertion of Bergoglio to be Pope was a CIA operation. And this was a plan by the deep state to support the deep church. In other words, there's a group since Vatican II. This is what Archbishop Vigano has been writing about for years. And McCarrick is at the center of it. That the connection between the intelligence community and Bergoglio in Argentina, and then Bergoglio surfacing in Rome to become Pope, with Pope Benedict XVI resigning as Pope, right, which is was a rather spectacular event, because popes do not resign; they stay in that position typically and traditionally until they die.
Right.
Okay, and so this was in a sense almost like a coup d'état. And when you realize that Pope Benedict had been writing in a fairly conservative way and traditional way of Catholic
right,
theology, but since Vatican II, which was opened up under Pope John Paul in 1962, the whole idea was that the church was going to modernize by admitting progressives. Okay, and that was opening the door to the ending of the Latin Mass, the redesign of a lot of Catholic liturgy, and even a redefining of the Catholic theology, in saying that we have to now take this openness to the followers of the Catholic Church, who would define the policies of the Catholic Church and define the doctrines of the Catholic Church. Whereas before, the Catholic Church had always been top down, and the rules were viewed as given by Jesus Christ for salvation, and these were not subjective moral standards. These were hard and fast moral rules by which human beings needed to live, which was the doctrine of the church. And one of those doctrines was that marriage is a sacrament between men and women, a man and a woman, to procreate children, and to then share the responsibility of raising those children with a moral education. Whereas you come in with the LGBTQ plus agenda, and that's saying that we've got to listen to all these marginalized minorities, and we have to keep redefining Catholic theology in terms of what the followers, what the parishioners want. And therefore, you start making a seat at the table for the LGBTQ community. What is Satan a religion? We need to honor Satan as a religion, or do we need to include all of these different sexual perversions and activities, and say they're equally qualified to be sanctified by God as is marriage between a man and a woman? And that's considered that. I think Archbishop Vigano, by opposing this Vatican II and this LGBT community, this synodal movement, and vocally opposing it, led to his excommunication, and he's still vocally opposing it. And
he was a guy. So Vigano was a guy early on in the early 2000s who put the finger on McCarrick's activities.
Yes, he did.
And he opposed McCarrick directly, and tried to get people to stop tried to get him to sort of to dial back his access to younger priests, and things like that.
Yeah.
McCarrick jumped around it.
I want to show this book here. We just published this, which is the Archbishop Vigano, and it's J'accuse. It's his shedding light on his excommunication. And J'accuse in French means I accuse.
Right.
So he's accusing Bergoglio of being the heretic. And I wrote the preface, the foreword to this. It's a short book, but it's extremely powerful. And it talks about, the Catholic Church having itself committed the heresy by rejecting the traditional doctrines of the church. And he says, how can it be possible? This is in the introduction that Archbishop Vigano wrote. How can it be possible that an esteemed prelate, an archbishop, an apostolic nuncio who has faithfully served the church and the Roman pontiff throughout his life is put on trial, condemned and executed for having done and said what popes and bishops have considered their grave duty for centuries? Since when has defending Catholic tradition, the priesthood, and the Mass become a canonical crime deserving the accusation of schism? Okay, so Archbishop Vigano lays it really out. He said, I've witnessed a true revolution from within the institutional structures of the church. First in my pastoral ministry as a simple priest, then as a member of the diplomatic corps of the Holy See, and the Secretary of State, as permanent observer to the Council of Europe, as apostolic nuncio to Nigeria, as a delegate for the pontifical representations of the Secretary of State, then the Secretary General of the Governorate of Vatican City State, and finally as apostolic nuncio to the United States. By the very admission of those who knew me, and even attested in the text of the decree of my excommunication, my rectitude and honesty have always been appreciated and have been the main reason why I have received positions of great responsibility. But this time I represented an element of disturbance due to my unavailability for compromise and power games, the phenomenon of corruption and immortality that I've tried to fight against have stirred up bitter enemies against me, so much so that they have generated actual plots aimed at slandering me, hindering my work, and making me get transferred. Okay, so what he's saying is, my own personal journey has not been an easy one, having experienced Vatican II as a young seminarian, and then it's quoted reforms as an official Roman curia. But the moment I understood the causal relationship between the consular revolution and the apostasy now widespread in the ecclesiastical body, everything became clear, and it was impossible for me not to raise my voice as a successor of the apostles. And so he goes strongly against Bergoglio and the opening up of the church to this woke agenda. And he accuses that Bergoglio is the one who is the heretic. Now, also, I'm going to reach back on my bookshelf for a minute and pull out two books. Number one, this is a book that was compiled a few years ago, A Voice in the Wilderness, of Archbishop Vigano's writings. And in it, he writes very hard. It was published by, let's see, by, who published this? It was, let's see, the name of the press. Take me a second to find it. But I want to make a couple points about this that are very important. I'm not sure if I can find it real quickly. Oh, the Angelical Press. And the book discusses McCarrick at great length. Okay, and it lays out what McCarrick did with the seminarians, as you say, is this was a time when Catholic seminaries, studying for the priesthood, they became homosexual institutions. And the church itself, with all of the deep church perversion of the priests being homosexual, and even with young boys sleeping with the altar boys, and which now has caused the Catholic Church a tremendous scandal. And the Archbishop Vigano is extremely critical Cardinal McCarrick in this book and writes at length about him.
And McCarrick is an absolutely evil character. He may be the most evil of the last several hundred years in the church. What he's done is taken the church right to the edge of, what they've done by installing Bergoglio as the Pope. They opened the door to put the Catholic Church in collusion with this entire cartel aligned human trafficking, drug trafficking movement that was promoted through policies in the Obama-Biden White House. Joe Biden was his pet project from 2014 to 2016 was called the Alliance for Prosperity. They gave $1.5 billion to governments of 3 small Central American countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Well, the people in Honduras were smuggling cocaine to the United States by the ton, and the United States government knew it. And Joe Biden and Barack Obama knew it, but they wanted the cartels on their side so they could bring in, they wanted to liberalize immigration. They wanted immigration reform. And what they wanted the Catholic Church to do was to, I call it morality laundering. They used Pope Francis for morality laundering. He came out and basically told the world we should have liberalized refugee policies in America, in Western Europe. And that's what they did. And this is the globalist goal. We're going to bring all the poor people to the wealthy people and fill the middle class with sort of the lower class people from other countries, and the elites will be okay. Everybody else is going to suffer. That's what this past election was all about. This election was an eruption about what Donald Trump did in 2016 when he said, we're going to build a wall. And people really started getting that. And I was in that White House in 2016 when he said, we're going to build a wall. I didn't really focus that much on the wall part of it. What I focused on Donald Trump's power was he went to places that no other presidential candidate had gone to. And I'd worked for 2 previous presidential candidates as they got reelected in 2004 Bush, 2012 Obama. And they went all over the place. Trump went to places they never went. He went to the people who needed to hear from him. And he built his reputation and his MAGA movement on the fact that he was speaking for the people. And what the people wanted then in 2016, they wanted a sensible immigration policy. And it wasn't happening. And so they elected Trump. The deep state came in and tried to undermine Trump. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, tried to undermine Trump. As he was getting elected in 2016, Bergoglio went out and did events basically on behalf of Obama, countering the Trump anti-immigration message. And that became even worse as time went on. By 2020, to take Trump out, they had to put together the plandemic, the Wuhan plandemic. And to do that, they used Bergoglio, the Catholic Church. They shut down the Catholic Church during this fake pandemic. And Bergoglio was the guy who did it in March of 2020. That was just as Joe Biden turned the corner in his re-election campaign. All of a sudden, he becomes the only guy being re-elected. The Democrats are sending all these mail-in ballot legal changes through the local legislatures. And all of a sudden, the election of 2020 became a huge rigged election. There's 15 million ballots that were cast for Joe Biden in 2020 that no one can find. Where did they have? They were cast for Joe Biden. Why weren't they cast for Kamala Harris 4 years later? Where did those Democrats go, those 15 million Democrats? People are starting to ask.
Well, that was we shut down the mail-in ballot fraud with gods5stones.com and finding the algorithms in the State Board of Election databases. Also, Mike, I guess it was in July, I wrote an article and published it in American Thinker, which was discussing your book and the fact that you were witness to this scheme by McCarrick to divert U.S. taxpayer funds and Catholic charities money into this cocaine smuggling and child sex trafficking operation that was centered in Honduras. And you had in 2014, the Obama administration launched this Alliance for Prosperity, and it opened up this flood of immigration from Central America's Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
Right.
And in 2014, Biden led the initiative to have Congress approve $750 million for the Alliance for Prosperity in 2016. Okay, so then this was all brokered by Dennis McCormick.
Right.
And one of you pointed out that the logs and the visitor logs document a visit by McCormick to McCarrick to McDonough in June 2014, the same month that Vox.com reported, quote, the United States government and the American public were startled by an influx of children traveling alone from Central America to the Rio Grande Valley in the U.S. In the spring and summer of 2014, the number of children reached a crisis point. Vox also noted that during the fiscal year 2014, unaccompanied children were apprehended in the U.S.-Mexico border with a 77% increase over the previous year.
Correct.
Okay, now, two more points. On July 25th, 2014, Obama held a meeting in the White House with President Molina of Guatemala, President Karen of El Salvador, and President Hernandez of Honduras. In his remarks to the press, Obama noted that he was there to discuss the rise of unaccompanied children traveling from Central America to the U.S. border. Okay, and Biden was photographed with Hernandez shaking hands. Subsequent to that photograph, McCarrick returned to the White House several times, according to the White House visitor logs. Okay, and in 2010, the National Catholic Reporter listed McCarrick as a member of Obama's spiritual cabinet. Now, in 2014 and 15, McCarrick had repeated meetings in the Vatican with Pope Francis, and numerous Catholic charities active in Honduras, a country where approximately 34% of the population was Catholic. The movie Sound of Freedom featured the child sex trafficking in Honduras, a country that the U.S. Embassy recognizes as, quote, a destination for women and girls from neighboring countries subject to sex trafficking. In Texas Public Radio on May 1, 2015, Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiega of the Archdiocese of San Antonio acknowledged Pope Francis' interest in Honduras and in the Alliance for Prosperity. Now, the complicity here of all these people, including in 2021, an investigation by the Archdiocese of St. Paul, which concluded that Dennis McDonough's brother, Father Kevin McDonough, as a top official of the Archdiocese, quote, had not always demonstrated sufficiently sound judgment in handling allegations of ministerial misconduct or attending to his duties to prevent harm and create safer environments. Although he was not accused of abusing children, McDonough was demoted from the Archdiocese to work as a pastor at the Incarnation Church, Catholic Church in Minneapolis. Now, again, the themes that are common in here are that you are utilizing the southern border wide open, both for drug trafficking and for the child sex slavery, the sex slavery in general, and also human slavery in general, where people end up working in basically slave conditions in one of these countries. Now, the CIA, I caught the CIA money laundering with HSBC Bank in 2011 to support the Mexican drug cartels. And right now, I'm maintaining that TD Bank just got fined $3 billion, and the CIA is very deeply involved in keeping the border open, running the drug cartels, and also running the sex slavery and making billions of dollars on it. The Catholic Church also makes billions of dollars on providing services for these immigrants.
Yes.
So, and at the center of all this is not only McDonough, but McCarrick.
McCarrick was very closely involved with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They're the ones that get all the money from the Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, to support refugee resettlement. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And they also, when the pandemic relief funds came out in 2020, the Catholic Church got $3.5 billion. And Trump talked about this at the Al Smith dinner. He talked about how he gave the Catholic Church a bunch of money because they needed it. The Cardinal called him. He said, we've got our schools. We need money. So what they did was they had a restriction on organizations that couldn't get relief if they had more than 50 people on it. They lifted that restriction for the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church wound up with $3.5 billion. One cardinal from Washington, a retired cardinal, Cardinal Worrell, who replaced McCarrick and was forced to resign because he kind of covered up for McCarrick. He got $2 million just for himself in relief funds. So the Catholic Church made a lot of money through these government affiliations with the Obama-Biden people, and also into the Trump administration. Trump's White House chief of staff was General John Kelly from 2017 through 2018, late 2018, a year and a half. John Kelly was deeply in collusion with the Honduran government that was smuggling drugs in the United States, cocaine by the ton. He was a close friend of, an associate with Juan Orlando Hernandez, then the president, who's now arrested and imprisoned for smuggling drugs alongside his brother. So this deep state goes from the Pentagon into the intelligence community. It goes into the Vatican, and it is collusion around drug smuggling, child sex trafficking, human trafficking, and it's the work of the devil. And this is what Pope Francis has allowed the Catholic Church to fall into. He's aligned them with the work of the devil. And that's what Archbishop Vigano is standing up for. He's saying, stop this. You're the wolf who's leading his flock to disaster. He's called on McCarrick to publicly confess. I, in my book, call on McCarrick, not McCarrick, I call him McDonough to confess. McCarrick has been deemed unable to stand trial because he's old and he can't really focus his thoughts. So he's non-compos mentis. So that's where McCarrick is legally. But Dennis McDonough, if he gets, and President Trump has come out, he says, I want to do a truth commission about what's going on in the intelligence communities. If this gets looked at by this truth commission, this will take out a huge swath of the worst aspects of our deep state. The deep state that colludes with drug dealers and cartels and human traffickers, and it turns the Catholic Church into, a force for evil. This is beyond description. It's an almost insurmountable evil, and it's come to a stop because we elected Donald Trump, and that election is going to change the course of history.
Well, first of all, you can't run a drug cartel or an international child sex operation without money. And you have to have a bank to do this, because you can't be driving around a semi truck full of $100 bills to stop at a taco stand and get your lunch by pulling out a few $100 bills from the back of the semi truck. And so therefore you got to get the money in the bank. The money is monitored. Every wire transfer in the United States and probably worldwide is monitored by the intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, and also the Treasury. So this crime was known. In fact, it had to have been known that the CIA was participating, if not running it. The border is not open by accident. The border could be closed if we determined to close it. Donald Trump has said that he's going to close the border, and we should have immigration that's robust, but we have to have vetting of the people who are coming in here to know who they are and why they're coming here. And we don't want to then inundate our cities with another Marxist objective, which is to turn them blue by changing the demographics. I think it was a great surprise to the Democrats that a lot of the Hispanics in the United States voted for Trump.
Yeah, they sure did.
And are Catholic and would be appalled to know what the church has become. The Catholic Church has become a corrupt homosexual aiding and pedophilia aiding, especially with young boys, sex with the priests, sex in general, and this whole sexual agenda has been the A prime mover to corrupt the entire organization of the church. It's also, I think, now pretty clear that Barack Obama himself is gay and has been, I think that's more of an open secret now. And when I was talking about this, when I wrote Abomination in 2008, people weren't ready to believe it. But we had Larry Sinclair with testimony of his homosexual encounter with Obama, and that was squelched by the intelligence community. So now we've got these powerful leaders who are serving the interests of Satan, and the money that they have available through the public treasury is enormous. And the Catholic Church has benefited handsomely from this money. But you're not going to get through the seminaries right now unless you become part of the homosexual agenda. You know, priests coming in and sleeping in your bed. What are you going to do? And if you don't go along with it, you know, the second book I wanted to show you is this book on the synodal process. It's another very, very good book. It's short, but it is written by Jose Antonio Ureta, Ureta, and Julio Laredo de Izcue, is QA. Okay, and it's the synodal process is a Pandora's box. And what they point out in here is that the whole idea is the bishops are saying we've got to go out and talk with the clergy and with the laity, the parishioners. And if they are going with an LGBT agenda, we needed to do that. In other words, they're making the official doctrine of the Catholic Church change. Wherever the people change to with the people's morals, that's where the church has to go. Okay, and so therefore, it isn't any fixed doctrine. It isn't Jesus Christ's message of salvation. This is a message of LGBT. Aren't these people? Why do we want to prevent these people from loving each other? And Obama and Pope Francis have been on every agenda of the left that's a lie. Not only that LGBT is perfectly acceptable, but that we should have climate change and quit using hydrocarbon fuels because they emit carbon dioxide, which can somehow a poisonous chemical, even though it's plant food. Every possible misconception and lie of Satan, these two, Obama and Pope Francis Bergoglio, have been put in place to advance. Now
I would say that Catholics around the world have to understand the Obama administration, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Dennis McDonough, those are the three primary people once McDonough became White House Chief of Staff in their daily briefing. They use the Catholic Church as a tool for their foreign policy. They use it as, and that's not what the church is for. And Pope Francis allowed that. So that Catholics around the world have to understand, they have to demand the separation of church and state as it should be, and not have church be a tool for foreign policy in the Middle East, in legalized resettlement of immigration, and in China. And the other thing is, and this is just a personal aside, I don't have a problem with gay people. I don't have there was a gay guy who was instrumental in getting Trump elected in Pennsylvania named Scott Pretzler. So I don't have a problem with gay people. I don't have a problem with the gay community. And there are gay people who are religious. That's between, in my opinion, them and their God. So, you know, this is a really tricky time for the church to go forward into this. And people are more accepting of the gay lifestyle now than they were when Theodore McCarrick was in the seminary in 1960. So there is something coming on that. And, you know.
Chris, if you'll put up the book I wrote on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy. And this is exposing woke insanity in an age of disinformation. And Mike, I'd encourage you to read this book. Because it shows how the ideology was purposely morphed into a sexual revolution, which was aimed at undermining Christ, Christianity, God, and creating anarchy, which is what they've done. Now, I'm going to tie this to Communist China in a minute, but my point I'm going to make is that the Catholic Church has become, in a sense, this is what Pope Leo XIII was worried about, that Satan has entered the Catholic Church and is now ruling the Catholic Church. And so therefore, in terms of people being gay or lesbian, there's always been a small percentage of all populations that are gay or lesbian or have sexual, what I consider to be perversions. Okay, but the point is, the demand now is that we celebrate these perversions, that we not only accept them, but we bless them, that we allow them legitimacy. And so therefore, the subjective nature of this postmodernism, which says, there is no absolute truth, there are no absolute values, there are no real rules. So someone can say, well, my sexual identity is not my sex organs, it's my gender, which belongs to a camel who lives 4,000 years ago and was a transsexual camel before there was even civilization. Okay, now that's fundamentally schizophrenic. That's the idea of a lunatic that needs psychiatric care. Okay, but that idea has got to be celebrated and made to be, you can't speak against it, because if you do, you're not politically correct and you have to be censored and negated. So these ideas they start from the public relations manipulation that began in the 60s with the gay movement, saying, why don't you let these two little men just love each other, these two little fuzzy bears, it's okay if they love each other, isn't it? Well, all the time they don't talk about what the sexual practices are. They don't show you gay parades. They don't show you whips and chains and beating each other. They don't show you the sadomasochism. They don't show you so then if all these perversions are acceptable, then next, why don't we have sex with the dead? That's acceptable too. Well, how about snuff sex, where you kill people? Well, that's just my proclivity, you can say. Why would you not allow me to do this? Okay, so the perversion here, the language perversion, and the fundamental, what Archbishop Vigano is saying, he's making a very fundamental moral statement. He's saying the Catholic Church has gone astray. The Catholic Church now, as an institution, is itself committing an apostasy. It is preaching against what the gospel of Jesus Christ is. Jesus Christ does not go out and, celebrate sexual perversion. He's here on earth to say, here are the rules, and there are consequences to not following God's rules on earth. And they're not arbitrary rules. And the Catholic Church has been doctrinally motivated for centuries until these people began to bring in their Marxism and begin to bring in their progressivism. And now the synodal movement has us talking to the marginalized minorities, which means bringing in room for the LGBT. And
well, I think
the church. One second. The church, I believe, and Vigano was saying it too, has become an anti-church, and that's the fundamental issue here, where the anti-church is then inclined to do the work of Satan, which means, as are the intelligence agencies, and you have the intelligence agencies running the world in a Truman Show. We think we're voting, but we're not. And then,
we voted this time, and I think what happened with this election, thankfully, it was an almost insurmountable evil. We surmounted the evil with the election. Thanks you for doing the work on the logarithms and the algorithms. What they did was the Democratic Party went too far. The Obama-Biden Democrats went too far with exactly what you're saying. They coddled the LGBTQ. They made them mainstream. And the majority of Americans are like, we don't want this. Hispanics didn't want that. It wasn't just Catholics. It's just any Americans. They just don't want it. They don't want people dancing around and,
prancing naked in the streets.
Drag queen shows to try to get, as recruiting movies for the military. They don't want that. Nobody wants that. So they went too far with it, and they've been punished at the election. It is also part of what the church is going to go through. The church is going to go through what this election just went through, and it's going to, the Democratic Party is going to get toppled. I think you're going to see in a very short time, Pope Francis is going to have to come up with an idea of what to do, because he's losing legitimacy day by day. When this book comes out that I'm publishing, his legitimacy will be seriously questioned by people all around the world.
Well, and look, you've got the Catholic Church also now and working with the communist Chinese government, and the Chinese government is picking the priests in the hierarchy for the Catholic Church in China while
Right.
suppressing the Catholic Church, and the Pope is happy to work with Xi Jinping, and again,
Right.
it's money; it's all money, and McCarrick, with his frequent embassies to China, architected this evil relationship between the Communist Chinese Party and the Vatican.
Yeah, there's another name you need to put into this. That's Secretary Parolin. Cardinal, who was the Secretary of the Vatican, Cardinal Parolin. Now there was a two-person team that basically excommunicated Archbishop Vigano, and Parolin is very involved in the how the Vatican has changed its approach to communist China. Basically, the betrayal of the Chinese Chinese Catholic Church, the underground church that thrived for hundreds of years. Parolin is the guy who's behind that, and Parolin was also very involved in. He was I think he was like a archbishop in Mexico, Nigeria, and Venezuela. Very involved in these Marxist areas that have a lot of oil, a lot of money, a lot of globalists, and a lot of corruption. So Parolin is a name we need to talk about too. I talk about him a lot in the book. Parolin is the guy who put together the report. It was done under his review that sort of explained what McCarrick did to the church, to the media, and to the people, Catholics. So they put out this report. It was a whitewash. It wasn't a real report. And that's what Vigano was saying. It basically, in that report, makes Vigano look like he wasn't really trying hard to get rid of McCarrick, where he really was. So this guy, it's not just Pope Francis. This is the deep state. Parolin, Pope Francis, and there's others. And, Bishop Vigano stands up to him and names them.
Well, it's the deep state and the deep church.
Yes.
And they're both now in this book, J'accuse, which we just published on authored by Archbishop Vigano. And what he says is he's talking about Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, who before Vigano also opposed the Catholic Church in terms of apostasy. And he writes, Archbishop Vigano is writing this here on the Catholic Church has become an anti-church, and it's antichrist oriented. To those who remind me that Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre never went so far as to question the legitimacy of the Roman pontiff, while acknowledging the heresy and even the apostasy of the consular popes when he exclaimed, "Rome has lost the faith, Rome is in apostasy." I remind them that in the last 50 years, the situation has dramatically worsened. In all probability, this great pastor today would act with equal firmness, publicly repeating what he said then only to his clerics, quote, "In this pastoral council, the spirit of error and lies has been able to work at ease, planting time bombs everywhere that will blow up the institution in due course." That's something that Archbishop Lefebvre wrote in 1977. And again, he who is seated on the throne of Peter participates in the worship of false gods. What conclusion could we draw, perhaps in a few months' time, in the face of these repeated acts of communication with false cults? I don't know. I wonder. But it is possible that we will find ourselves forced to believe that the Pope is not Pope, because at first sight it seems to me, I do not yet want to say it in a solemn and public way, that it is impossible for someone who is a heretic to be publicly and formally Pope. That was in March 1986. Now, I did a DVD when Pope Francis was first put into place, which was on the last Pope. And I'm increasingly coming to the conclusion that the last Pope was Benedict XVI. And this pope is not a legitimate pope.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think we're at a crisis in the Catholic Church, which is similar to the crisis that we have now seen in the United States government. And I think as the people of the United States have just soundly rejected this woke agenda of Kamala Harris, of Joe Biden, and Biden's corruption was massive in terms of not only also participating in Ukraine, taking billions of dollars from China for his son and the son's investment firms out of both Ukraine and of China, stealing money out of the Treasury. All this money the Treasury's deficit spending is going somewhere. It's all being stolen. And you've got that much money funding international organizations of intelligence operating the most grievous crimes imaginable against human beings, fentanyl and drugs across the border, supporting the drug cartels, children sold into sex slavery, tricked into sex slavery to live lives of unimaginable horror, people forced into forced labor, working in lives of unimaginable horror, with this entire crisis at the border created intentionally by the Obama and Biden demons and their State Department and their CIA, and fostered by the Catholic Church.
Yeah. And I wrote this back and forth. I did some emailing back and forth with Archbishop Vigano. I said, look, we're just telling the truth about what's happening in the church, what's happening in the Obama-Biden White House. And the truth is God's word. So God's on our side on this. God will fix his church. God will fix Jesus's church. Jesus will fix his church. We're the vessels. Our words, our truth is how people learn and hear. And that's what happened in this election. People got the real truth about what was happening with Biden, who Donald Trump really was. It wasn't through a filter of media. They got through around that media filter that thwarted him in 2020, that was part of that pandemic. And so the people were able to make the choice because the people are good people. People, whether they're Catholics, it's Catholics in the Catholic Church, or American voters, or European voters in all their various countries. People want basically the same civilized values. And so we're going to always get that. But what we need is the truth. We need God's word is the truth. And God is on our side when we tell it. And we're just sitting here telling the truth.
Well, you've documented the truth and you were there firsthand to experience it. You saw it. And now you're chronicling it. And I'm sure it was a shock to you when you realized this evil was there.
Yeah, I didn't want to write the book. I said that at the beginning. I don't want to have to write this book because I don't want to believe this is happening, but it is. So it's an almost insurmountable evil. And we talk about it. We inform people about it. They make decisions about it. They make decisions about how they attend church, how they discuss their religion with their pastors and their bishops. And that influences the direction of the church. That's how it has to happen.
Well, this evil has to be exposed and has to be rooted out. And it has to, even if it brings down great institutions, it has to happen. Donald Trump is going on to the almost unsurmountable task of reforming this amount of evil. And I don't think it's possible for us to do it alone. I think the entire biblical lesson is that the real path here, and what we're advancing and arguing for, is ultimately, asking for forgiveness and for repenting and asking for revival. So 2 Chronicles 7:14, which basically says, if my people will quit their evil ways and get on their knees and beg forgiveness, I will hear their plea and save their land. And we're in one of those moments where we have not yet had the judgment of God. It's impending. There will be a judgment of God. But I think that enough people have come awake instead of being woke that are fighting this now. And you see that in the vote that Donald Trump got, winning all 5 of the swing states, sweeping the majority of the country, except for some enclaves in just on the Pacific coast, not even all of California anymore. A few, states in the Northeast. And other than that, the rest of the country said, no way, we don't want this nonsense. We reject it. And so therefore, that is the beginning of repentance and revival. But again, and I watched this morning a video with Donald Trump saying we've got to bring the Bible back into our lives. We've got to bring God back we won't do this without bringing God back in. And if you remember when the Antifa and Black Lives Matters were trying to burn down St. John's Presbyterian Church, which is right across the street from the White House on the other side of Lafayette Park, a church that every president of the United States has attended virtually back to the beginning, that he was held a Bible out in front, and the mainstream media ridiculed him and blamed him for the riot and blamed him for the damage done to the church. I think the American people now have rejected the media, are beginning to see the CIA, and I think we'll find the CIA's hand in the middle of deposing Benedict XVI and putting Bergoglio in as a false pope, who was a Marxist with a reputation, and I think we're going to expose that reputation. You don't think that Bergoglio is supporting all of this going on in the priesthood becoming homosexual and pedophilia with boys without having himself had a history in Argentina. And I think that history needs to be exposed. We need to understand it. We need to understand who we're dealing with. Same as with Obama. And these agendas want to take us away from traditional families. We're now having increasing numbers of children raised by one parent because of divorce. We're not having parents remain in marriages that require mature reconciliation and adjustment to another person. Not easy to do, but they're a commitment you make. And that commitment has deep meaning. It's why these are sacraments. It's why these are vows. These are promises that you should not make casually. And so therefore, until we get back to God and understanding that, our experience here is all we get to take from here, and it will be judged. The idea that, guys like Noah Harari can say God is just a sky fairy. Well, I'd like to see Harari, when he faces judgment, argue that to God himself. And so therefore, we're dealing with a fundamental disconnect, which I've tried to work on in that book on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, just like I tried to expose the truth about climate science and the truth about energy, energy, climate change, and global warming. I wanted to make sure that everybody understood this was all nonsense. And so therefore, we're doing this in anticipation of your book. But Chris, if you'll put up the current book, I want people to see that again so that they can get the current book in anticipation of the future book. So Mike, the current book you have out is, again...
Current book is The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden. And it has a lot in there about this Alliance for Prosperity, a blow-by-blow description of Joe Biden's involvement in it, Orlando Hernandez's involvement in it, and General Kelly's involvement in it, and where it took the government in through 2016. I believe I stopped it in 2016. But this new book has what came out of that, and sort of the Vatican, what the Vatican did with the Alliance of Prosperity. So yes, The Case to Impeach and Imprison Joe Biden, important book to get. The two of them together are very important, and they complement each other really well.
Well, Mike, we'll have you back, and when the new book is published, and we'll do more interviews on this, because I think you've had firsthand experience of the nature of this evil that we're describing in the deep state and the deep church.
Exactly. And
it has to be ended. It has to be rooted out. And with God's help, it will be done. Any last comments you'd like to make as we wrap up this session? No,
but I thank Archbishop Pagano for all his work and his prayers. And I thank Archangel Michael for his help in this too. I think I held at 8. I had Archangel Michael's, St. Michael's prayers helping me throughout this process.
Well, it's important. It should be said at the end of the Mass, and the Mass should be restored to the original liturgy. And we're not white supremacists for saying that. And we're not terrorists because we believe in God. And the concluding point I want to make in all of this is that, again, God always wins.
Mm-hmm.
God's going to win here too. God did not create this experience and the human race for Satan to win. But again, this is a great test, and we are going to face the judgment of God because we have just killed too many children and babies cut to pieces in the womb, their body parts sold. Since Roe v. Wade, we've allowed God to be taken out of our schools by the Supreme Court since the 1940s. We've got to restore these things. We've got to get back to a limited government, which does not have so much money and so much power that control our lives, and realize that we the people are sovereign, and that the states were constituted to be sovereign to the federal government, which had limited enumerated powers in the original Constitution. So therefore, our founding fathers realized that our rights were bestowed by God. Human rights could not be taken away. The human soul has a value to God that merited its creation and also its salvation. And that Jesus Christ came to earth for that purpose. And his mission was not to be liberation theology and twisted into the woke version of Kumbaya.